My name is Mark Orr, and I'm the Executive Director of the UK and Ireland Spill Association. And I've been asked today to summarise some of the 5 webinars that we've done on the MV Wakashio incident, but really to highlight on lessons to be learned from it. So we're a busy trade association for marine and inland response companies in the UK. And the point I want to make is that none of us were there, having to juggle conflicting priorities, working against the clock, lacking full information like you do in most incidents, and we don't know the pressure that was involved in making decisions and taking action that was no doubt done at the time in the best interests of health, safety, and the environment. And as observers, we do not have that pressure, and of course, we now have the luxury of perspective. So very briefly, because I know you'll be familiar with the incident, Wakashio was a modern bulk carrier, 300 meters long, 50 meters wide, 203,000 deadweight tons, registered in Panama, importantly owned by Nagasaki Shipping, and was being operated on charter by Mitsui OSK Lines. She had been working in Australia for the prior 6 months, then was being routed from China to Brazil, and for some reason, as opposed to bearing course to go round the Cape of Good Hope off the southern tip of South Africa, she entered Mauritius waters on the 23rd of July, 2 days prior to impact, without changing direction and speed, ended up on a reef just on the 25th of July, without altering course or changing. And that's a picture of her aground at 19:15 hours on the 25th of July. Now, questions are, first question, what lessons were learnt by the Mauritius authorities 2 years on from a similar grounding when the MV Benito hit rocks on the 26th in 2016? Yes, different size vessel, but could, as Wakashio, have been held stern on to the seas, which would have enabled her recovery, which they managed to do with the Benito. Also, when she did ground, this is a picture on the 1st of August, and you can see all the plume of coral and dust debris from the reef that she was aground on. What was happening ashore? What preparation was being taken in case for spillage? And why wasn't the Polmar plan rolled into action to protect the vulnerable sites which then existed down current from where she was? On the 6th of August, as we know, the first spillages occurred. This seemed to surprise everyone on board, everyone in Mauritius. But very quickly, because of reasonably strong winds, the fuel was beginning to move ashore. 16 days after her grounding, the fuel, this picture, overhead picture, shows fuel coming from the vessel, but it also shows a tanker alongside and some salvage vessels in location, which really weren't there until roughly around this sort of date. And here you can see the tanker pumping out the residual fuel on board. And you can also see the IBCs full of fuel on deck, which were in fact transferred across the tanker. And on the 10th of August, the Prime Minister tells the nation that the Wakashio is likely to break up. The worst case scenario is going to happen as the boat is likely to fall apart. And on the 12th of August, Smith Salvage, the Pointed Salvers, announced that pumping operations were complete. And then she starts to break out. The stern is stuck on the reef. The bow is in ballast. It's afloat. She's got to bend somewhere. And on the 15th of August, she separated, and this will be a picture which is familiar to all of you. And on the 15th of August, this is where the carrier is, the ship has broken into two. This is where the product from it has now gone. And note just that just by Point Esney, that round island, that is a really precious piece of natural environment. It's its own little ecosystem full of nature and precious species and flora and fauna. And that was unprotected, but it was obvious what was going to happen once the vessel was stern on to the reef. And sadly, on the 31st of August, the first deaths in this incident occurred. The tug on the right is Sir Gaeton Duval. It collided with a barge that it was towing, which was full of product which was recovered from the Wakashio, and unfortunately, the vessel overturned, and a number of the crew members were lost. I'm not sure whether it was 3 or 4. The question was, why was it routed into the stormy weather on the eastern side of the island, and why did it not go round to on the western side? The first real news of why the incident occurred was given by the Panama Maritime Authority on the 9th of September, so some 46 days after the initial incident, when they reported they were very critical of the level of seamanship in the hours leading to the grounding of the vessel. The vessel deviated from its approved navigation plan, and the captain authorised an approach close to the shore to gain telephone and internet signal. And he, the first officer, and the chief engineer were on the bridge at the time of the impact. Okay, so the spills occurred. What happened next? The government had appointed PolyEco, who are based in Mauritius, to clean the impacted shoreline and manage waste disposal. Le Floc Pollution had been appointed to deal with some of the incidents around the Wakashio, but obviously with her loss, they were no longer required. And we were lucky to have PolyEco contributing to 2 of our webinars. They were very good presentations, and I would recommend that they're viewed. Now, being based in Mauritius and employing local people as part of their normal work, they were able to expand, and they eventually employed 370 local Mauritians to assist in the cleanup and the waste management. It went very well, with areas gradually opened back to the Mauritius authorities as they were completed, with most areas opened by December the 20th. The last area being in the mangroves were opened in March 2021. And importantly, aquaculture, whilst initially closed after the incident, once it was clear that the situation was under control, it proceeded virtually unaffected, which was a great boost to its economy. And the current situation, the stern section, this is an earlier picture, a couple of months ago. Basically, you won't see anything above water now. It's virtually all removed. But note that it took a year longer than expected due to unusually rough weather on the reef. So legally, and this is important because it has a bearing on any future incidents and is a learning point, the captain and the first officer were charged with unlawful interference with the operation of a property of a ship likely to endanger its safe navigation. Bail was refused. They lost a second application for bail on the 20th of October 21, but their case was heard in December 21. And there was much finger pointing between the captain and chief officer who was really in charge. Eventually, having initially pleaded not guilty, they then, on the 27th of December, pleaded guilty to endangering safe navigation. Both were sentenced to 20 months in prison. The captain admitted to drinking moderately during a birthday party on board on the day of the grounding. Both had been in custody for 16 months. The captain was released on the 30th of December, and the chief officer was released on the 17th of January. So that was the legal side. We have an indication of what happened during the incident. So Mauritius has had a lot of internal investment to enable it to become to protect its valued coastline in the event of a spill. And you can see there on that slide how much. The question was, where was this capability when an incident like the Benito occurred? And note that they were only able to deploy 3,348 meters of booms. Yes, just 3,348 meters of booms, with a substantial, virtually half of it, to protect the Blue Bay Marine Park, which is a precious Ramsar site, but was not downwind of where the Wakashio was. If anything, it was slightly upwind of where the Wakashio was. But anyway, a lot of the coastline was left unprotected because they didn't have resource. So the compensation, important aspect here is that Mitsui OSK were the charter of the vessel, but actually it's the owner of the vessel which has to claim for the claim for under its insurance. The charterer pledged 1 billion yen, $9.42 million, which is actually being used now to help Mauritius recover from the incident. But because Mauritius ratified the 1976 version of the Convention on the Limitation of Liability for Maritime Claims, this limited payments to 2 billion yen, just 18.7 million US dollars. While Japan nationally has signed the 1996 convention version of the convention, which has an upper limit of 3 times that, i.e. 7 billion yen. So that is an important consideration, and any nation affected who has a maritime coastline perhaps needs to think why they would want to sign the retained signature on the 1976 version. Okay, now Wakashio is insured by the Japanese P&I Club, and maybe they could cover up to £1 billion. Now, the claim is likely to be a large claim of many hundreds of $millions. But bear in mind that money has only small sums of money have been drip fed in to cover some of the costs of the recovery. But there is a lot of information being gathered, including our webinars, and this will go to assessment in 2022. But as I say, some interim costs have been paid. So I want to delve, that's the incident in a sense, and I want to talk now about how it was handled. With the exception of the flag state Panama, who I've already mentioned, the owner Nagasaki and the charter MOL, who were fairly open in their communication, there was an absence of communication by the Mauritian government. This allowed the void to be filled in print media by views from experts and social media by anyone who had an opinion. And for a long time, it was assumed by many in the international media that the Wakashio was in fact a tanker. So the government appeared to hide behind the ship owner, the salver, the charterer, then the IMO representative, when they should have taken the communication lead. It did cause a lot of loss of confidence in the government and a very difficult time for it. In Mauritius, they had struggled with COVID. It affected tourism, which is one of their largest incomes into the nation. Fishing had also been affected. The economy was weak, and throughout, the government had not shown particularly effective leadership. There was outrage against the way contracts had been released. There was a lot of unrest in the city, in the country, and from Mauritians abroad at the lack of confidence in the government. And this affected its international reputation, and trade agreements and free trade agreements with China and India, which were due to have been signed in 2020, weren't signed. And in fact, they were only signed late in 2021. So the socio-political impact of these events cannot be underestimated. So let's look at the maritime pollution plan that they had in place. It did not appear to anticipate the risk of a grounding despite the 2016 incident with the MV Benito. It focused only on principally on Port Louis, which is their major port, and dealing with a fuel transfer spill that might occur in harbour. It therefore had a limited stock of equipment available to deal with an incident, hence just 3.3 kilometres of boom being available, and it wasn't open water boom, it was more absorbent boom with some fence booms used inside a port. 50% of the stock was then used to protect Blue Bay Marine Park. This left the downwind assets, including other Ramsar sites of special scientific interest, very vulnerable and exposed to the contamination as it spread. In this case, there was a very rigid definition of what constituted an incident, i.e. and that had to be a release of product, which restricted seeking support from their island neighbours in Reunion, India and others, which could have been classed as preventative work once the vessel had grounded. Leadership was lacking, and we'll cover it again under communication. However, in the plan, it did suggest bagasse booms, and the public mobilised to manufacture them in great numbers with support of local NGOs. 50 kilometres of boom, 50 kilometres of boom were manufactured over 2 weeks and deployed by local fishermen and local people. They may have been a nightmare to recover and process as waste, but they held product on the water where it was easier to recover using skimmers, absorbents and buckets. But it stopped the pollution getting worse. Also, the government, it did enable them to use competent fishermen who couldn't fish. They became boat drivers, spill responders and spill cleanup staff. And they were managed by Polyeco, who were already established in Mauritius, knew the coastline, knew the people, knew the politics, and knew how to get things done. And they managed the cleanup and the waste disposal, and they did it in a way which was sympathetic to local fishermen and to residents. So at the moment, the MARPOL plan is being written with IMO support, but any plan, it's great to talk about it, but you've got to practice it. And you've got to practice all scenarios that are in the plan. If you don't, unfortunately, you'll find what happened in Mauritius will happen again. Importantly, the Southern Indian Ocean Response Plan did not kick in and was not effective. And this needs looking at, as shipping is likely to, it will increase, not decrease on this particular route. Communications. In any instance, it is essential to have a strong management team who are used to working together, who have clear areas of responsibility. And this should apply to any incident, be it civil, public, health, marine, military. The team should be used to working together, have clear responsibilities, supported by staff who are used to working under pressure, can communicate under pressure, and have delegated access to financial and personnel assets, e.g. the military, civil, public, to ensure an adequate response. And this should all be supported with a clear communication plan that covers all media. It's usual to have daily briefings, and many governments have had to do these during COVID, but the government should be supported by experts so that it is government-led communication. This does require individuals to have media management skills. They must rehearse access to technology and be comfortable with communication by all media formats, including social media. It is essential to fill the information vacuum, and unfortunately this hampered the work of the good work which the Mauritius government did do, but they didn't tell the story. Working in a pandemic, it took UK staff, as an example, 8 to 10 days from leaving the UK to be able to work on the ground. This disrupted the response, and there were similar delays for Japanese and Indian teams. There needs to be a plan to accelerate this. The Wakashio, equally, they had no crew changeovers for 6 months, and 2 crew had been on board for over 12 months. And no doubt this affected the response to the incident. And note that the Coast Guard, Mauritius Coast Guard, had to wait for COVID test results before they could support any work on the vessel. This was the first spill that involved very low sulfur fuel oil. We learnt a lot about how it behaves in water from this incident, and I know that this information is being shared. It behaved differently to what we expect. We need to learn how to manage its unplanned loss, because this is likely to become, in the short term, the principal fuel. We need to apply learning, we need to share it as widely as possible, and marine pollution plans need to be adjusted to accommodate it. The other significant point to consider is what will happen with other emerging fuels. Managing human error. A captain trying to enable his crew to communicate via WhatsApp seems a generous thing to do. And we know 2 crew had been on board for more than a year. This benevolent gesture went all wrong, and no one ashore knew what they were doing. Why? They didn't have the charts or the control measures to make this operation safe. Why did they who were experienced, the captain and first officer were very experienced, why were they under such pressure that they ignored the risks? Unfortunately, in this occasion, the holes in the Swiss cheese lined up and it went very, very badly wrong. Was this all their fault? Probably, to a degree, yes, but the contributory factors must be understood and appreciated because they're not unique to this vessel. Future risks will be greater as ship bridges become more automated, and maritime pollution plans and Coast Guard must be alert to the fact that this could happen again on any coast, on any exposed coastline. I mean, recently in the English Channel, we've had two vessels collide. One of them was a chemical ship. Why on earth did that happen in daylight at sea in a very busy place? We've also got to remember and appreciate that that you've got to manage the expectations of a nation where these incidents occurs. Mauritius has a GDP of just $31 billion. That is less than the UK defence budget, and it has a population of just 1.2 million. However, we tend to judge the actions of smaller nations through European or American eyes, and smaller developing nations need support to meet international requirements. However, and we've seen that Mauritius had support, but the support needs to be continual, perhaps needs to be further, future investment needs to be linked against their preparedness plans to ensure that capability is maintained. So those are really some of my summaries that we've got. I know we've rushed through it, but I know that time is precious to your conference. In all, we've done 5 webinars on this, and they're available through that link on our website. And if you wish to make contact with me, I can reach through info@ukeirespill.org, and that is also my mobile number. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful and that the conference you're holding today has value to you and some lessons can be learned. Good luck in the future.